In the heart of London, where ancient traditions meet modern threats, a single beep from a scanning device would unravel a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of power. What started as a routine security check on a young princess's school backpack would expose a web of surveillance, betrayal, and danger that had been lurking in the shadows of the royal family for months. This is the true story of how one dedicated royal protection officer's attention to detail prevented what could have been the most devastating security breach in modern royal history. It's a story of loyalty tested, trust shattered, and the price of keeping secrets in a world where every move is watched, recorded, and potentially weaponized. The discovery of that tiny tracking device would not only change the life of Princess Charlotte forever, but would also reveal that sometimes the greatest threats come from those closest to the throne. The morning mist hung low over Kensington Palace as Detective Inspector Sarah Mitchell adjusted her earpiece and checked her watch for the third time. At 35, she was one of the youngest officers ever assigned to the Royal Protection Squad, a position she had earned through 15 years of exemplary service with the Metropolitan Police. Her colleagues often joked that she could spot trouble from a mile away, but Sarah knew it was simply a matter of paying attention to details that others might overlook. Princess Charlotte, now 8 years old, was preparing for another day at Thomas's Battersea, the prestigious preparatory school that had become a second home to her. The young princess had grown accustomed to the careful choreography that surrounded her daily routine, though she remained blissfully unaware of the complex security measures that protected her every moment. Sarah had been Charlotte's primary protection officer for nearly 2 years, a role that required her to maintain the delicate balance between keeping the child safe and allowing her to experience as normal a childhood as possible. It was a responsibility that weighed heavily on her shoulders, especially given the increasing number of security threats that had been reported in recent months. The morning routine began as it always did. Charlotte's nanny, Mrs. Wood Henderson, helped the princess gather her school supplies while Sarah conducted her standard security sweep of the route to school. The protection team had identified 3 different paths to Thomas's Battersea, and they rotated between them randomly to prevent any potential threats from establishing patterns. As Charlotte bounced down the palace corridors, her backpack swinging from side to side, Sarah noticed something that made her pause. There was a slight bulge in the side pocket of the bag that she hadn't seen before. It was subtle, barely noticeable unless someone was specifically looking for irregularities, but to Sarah's trained eye, it stood out like a red flag. The backpack was a standard school issue, navy blue with the school crest embroidered on the front. Charlotte had been using the same bag for several months, and Sarah had inspected it countless times as part of her routine security checks. She prided herself on knowing every detail of the princess's belongings, from the number of pencils in her pencil case to the specific book she carried on any given day. Without alerting Charlotte to her concerns, Sarah approached the young princess with a warm smile. The child had grown fond of her protection officer, often chatting excitedly about her day at school or asking Sarah about her work. It was important that Charlotte never felt like she was under surveillance, even though that was exactly what was happening every moment of her life. "Good morning, Princess Charlotte," Sarah said, kneeling down to the child's eye level. "May I take a quick look at your bag before we head to school?" "Just our usual check." Charlotte nodded enthusiastically, always eager to cooperate with the security protocols that had become second nature to her. She handed over the backpack without hesitation, trusting Sarah completely. This trust was something that Sarah never took lightly, knowing that the relationship between a protection officer and their charge was built on mutual respect and understanding. As Sarah's hands moved over the bag, she felt the small, hard object in the side pocket more clearly. It was roughly the size of a coin, thin and circular, definitely not something that belonged in a child's school bag. Her pulse quickened slightly, but she maintained her calm demeanor, knowing that any sign of alarm could frighten Charlotte or alert potential threats that their device had been discovered. The object was cleverly hidden, nestled between the padding of the pocket and the outer fabric. Someone had taken great care to place it in a location where it would be unlikely to be detected during routine inspections. The fact that it had been so carefully concealed suggested that this was not a random act, but rather a deliberate and sophisticated operation. Sarah's mind raced through the possibilities. A tracking device would be the most likely explanation, but who would want to track Princess Charlotte's movements? The royal family's schedule was already heavily monitored and coordinated by the protection team, so any tracking device would have to be placed by someone with malicious intent. The list of people who had access to Charlotte's personal belongings was relatively small. Family members, palace staff, school personnel, and the protection team itself all had varying degrees of access. The thought that someone within this trusted circle might be responsible for planting the device sent a chill down Sarah's spine. Without removing the device or giving any indication that she had found something suspicious, Sarah completed her inspection of the bag and handed it back to Charlotte. She needed to think carefully about her next steps. Removing the device immediately might alert whoever had placed it that their operation had been compromised. On the other hand, allowing Charlotte to carry a tracking device posed potential security risks. Sarah made the decision to let Charlotte proceed to school as normal while she quietly initiated an investigation. She discreetly signaled to her colleague, Officer James Reynolds, using the subtle hand signals that all protection officers learned during their training. James, a veteran of the protection squad with over 20 years of experience, immediately understood that something was amiss. As they escorted Charlotte to the waiting vehicle, Sarah's mind was already working through the investigation protocol. She would need to involve the head of the Royal Protection Squad, Commander William Hayes, but she wanted to gather more information before raising the alarm. The discovery of the tracking device could have serious implications for the security of the entire royal family. The drive to Thomas's Battersea proceeded without incident, but Sarah found herself constantly scanning their surroundings for any signs of surveillance. If someone was indeed tracking Charlotte's movements, they might have people positioned along the route to school. She made mental notes of every vehicle they passed, every pedestrian on the sidewalk, and every building that offered a clear view of their path. Charlotte chatted happily in the back seat, completely unaware of the tension that had gripped her protection team. She talked about her upcoming spelling test and her excitement about the school's upcoming sports day. Sarah found herself both impressed by the child's resilience and worried about the potential threats that were apparently closer than anyone had realized. When they arrived at the school, Sarah walked Charlotte to her classroom, as she did every morning. The routine was comforting in its predictability, but today it felt different. Every teacher they passed, every parent dropping off their child, every member of the school staff became a potential suspect in Sarah's mind. Someone had gained access to Charlotte's belongings, and that someone could be anyone. As Charlotte disappeared into her classroom with a cheerful wave, Sarah knew that the real work was just beginning. She had discovered what could be a significant security breach, but finding the tracking device was only the first step. Now she needed to figure out who had placed it, why they had done so, and most importantly, what they planned to do with the information they were gathering. The investigation that was about to unfold would test not only Sarah's skills as a protection officer, but also her ability to navigate the complex world of royal security. She had no way of knowing that this small discovery would ultimately expose a conspiracy that reached much deeper into the royal household than anyone could have imagined. Standing outside Charlotte's classroom, watching the young princess settle into her morning routine, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settle even more heavily on her shoulders. The tracking device in the backpack was more than just a security threat. It was a violation of the trust that the royal family had placed in everyone around them. Someone had betrayed that trust, and Sarah was determined to find out who. The secure conference room in the basement of Kensington Palace felt smaller than usual as Sarah Mitchell sat across from Commander William Hayes. The fluorescent lights cast harsh shadows across his weathered face as he studied the photographs that Sarah had taken of the tracking device, using a specialized camera designed to capture evidence without disturbing the scene. Commander Hayes was a man who had dedicated his entire career to protecting the royal family. At 58, he had seen threats evolve from simple protesters to sophisticated cyber attacks, but the discovery of a tracking device on Princess Charlotte's belongings represented something entirely new. This was personal, intimate, and deeply troubling. Sarah had spent the previous evening conducting careful research on the device without removing it from Charlotte's bag. Using a portable scanner, she had determined that it was a high-end GPS tracking unit, the kind typically used by intelligence agencies rather than common criminals. The device was sophisticated enough to transmit location data in real time while remaining virtually undetectable to standard security sweeps. The technical specifications are concerning, Sarah explained, pointing to the detailed analysis she had compiled overnight. This isn't something that can be purchased at an electronics store. The manufacturing markings suggest it's military-grade equipment, possibly sourced from specialized security contractors. Commander Hayes leaned back in his chair, his expression growing more serious with each piece of information Sarah provided. The implications were staggering. If someone with access to military-grade surveillance equipment was targeting Princess Charlotte, it suggested a level of planning and resources that went far beyond typical security threats. The investigation had already revealed several disturbing facts. The device had been active for at least 3 weeks, silently transmitting Charlotte's location data to an unknown recipient. During that time, the princess had attended school, participated in family outings, and even attended a private birthday party for one of her classmates. Every movement had been monitored and recorded. "We need to consider the possibility that this is part of a larger operation," Commander Hayes said quietly. If they're tracking Charlotte, they might be tracking other members of the family as well. We need to expand the investigation immediately. Sarah nodded, having reached the same conclusion during her sleepless night of analysis. The tracking device on Charlotte's bag might be just one piece of a much larger surveillance network. The thought that Prince George, Prince Louis, or even Prince William and Princess Catherine might be unknowingly carrying similar devices was terrifying. The commander immediately authorized a comprehensive security sweep of all royal family members' belongings. Within hours, a team of technical specialists would discreetly examine every bag, piece of clothing, and personal item belonging to the Wales family. The operation would need to be conducted without alerting the family members themselves, as any change in routine might tip off whoever was behind the surveillance. Meanwhile, Sarah was tasked with investigating how the device had been placed on Charlotte's bag. The security protocols surrounding the princess's belongings were extensive, with multiple checkpoints and verification procedures. For someone to successfully plant a tracking device required either incredible skill or inside knowledge of the security system. The list of people with access to Charlotte's personal items was surprisingly long. When Sarah began to compile it systematically, palace staff members, including housekeepers, maintenance workers, and personal assistants, all had varying degrees of access to the family's private quarters. School personnel, from teachers to janitors, came into contact with Charlotte's belongings on a daily basis. Even members of the extended royal family and their staff occasionally had opportunities to access the children's things during family gatherings. Sarah began the painstaking process of conducting background investigations on every person who had been near Charlotte's belongings in the past month. She pored over security footage, interviewed staff members, and cross-referenced schedules to determine who had been where and when. The investigation required delicate handling, as she couldn't reveal the true reason for her inquiries without potentially compromising the ongoing operation. One name that kept appearing in Sarah's investigation was Thomas Whitmore, a relatively new member of the palace maintenance staff. Whitmore had been hired 6 months earlier to handle specialized electronic systems maintenance, a position that gave him access to areas of the palace that were normally restricted. His background check had been thorough, but Sarah decided to dig deeper into his history. What she discovered was troubling. Whitmore had previously worked for a private security company that had contracts with several foreign governments. His technical skills were impressive, perhaps too impressive for someone whose job was supposed to be maintaining basic electronic systems. More concerning was the fact that his employment had begun just before the first reports of unusual activity around the royal family's digital communications. Sarah also investigated the possibility that the tracking device had been placed during one of Charlotte's school activities. The princess participated in several extracurricular programs, including art classes and music lessons, that took place outside the main school building. During these activities, her belongings were sometimes left unattended in changing rooms or storage areas where they could potentially be accessed by unauthorized individuals. The school's security cameras provided some useful information, but they also revealed gaps in coverage that could have been exploited by someone familiar with the facility. Sarah made note of these vulnerabilities while carefully reviewing footage from the past month, looking for any suspicious behavior or unfamiliar faces. As the investigation progressed, Sarah became increasingly convinced that they were dealing with a professional operation rather than an opportunistic crime. The sophistication of the tracking device, the careful placement that had avoided detection for weeks, and the inside knowledge required to bypass security protocols all pointed to someone with significant resources and expertise. The psychological profile that began to emerge was of someone who was patient, methodical, and extremely well informed about royal security procedures. This wasn't someone acting on impulse or emotion. This was a calculated operation with specific objectives that remained unclear. Commander Hayes assigned additional resources to support Sarah's investigation, including cybersecurity specialists who could analyze the tracking device's communication protocols. They discovered that the device was transmitting data to a server located overseas, using sophisticated encryption that would be difficult to trace back to its ultimate destination. The international aspect of the operation raised the stakes considerably. If a foreign intelligence service was behind the surveillance of Princess Charlotte, it could represent a significant threat to national security. The information being gathered could potentially be used to plan kidnapping attempts, assassination plots, or other serious crimes against the royal family. Sarah found herself working 18-hour days, driven by the knowledge that every moment of delay could put Charlotte and her family at greater risk. She coordinated with intelligence agencies, analyzed technical data, and continued her investigation into palace personnel, all while maintaining the appearance that everything was normal. The stress of the investigation was taking its toll on everyone involved. Commander Hayes looked like he had aged years in the span of days, while Sarah struggled to maintain her calm demeanor during her daily interactions with Charlotte. The young princess continued her routine, unaware that her every movement was being monitored by both her protectors and unknown adversaries. 3 days after the initial discovery, the technical team made a breakthrough. They had successfully traced the tracking device's communications to a specific server farm in Eastern Europe, but the trail went cold there. However, the timing of the data transmissions revealed a pattern that suggested the information was being forwarded to multiple recipients, possibly in different countries. This discovery confirmed Sarah's worst fears. They weren't dealing with a single threat, but rather an organized network with international connections. The surveillance of Princess Charlotte was apparently part of a larger intelligence operation that could have far-reaching implications for the security of the entire royal family. As Sarah prepared her report for the next morning's briefing, she reflected on how much their understanding of the threat had evolved since she first felt that small, hard object in Charlotte's backpack. What had started as a routine security concern had mushroomed into an international investigation, with implications that extended far beyond the safety of one 8-year-old princess. The investigation was far from over, but Sarah had already learnt enough to know that they were facing an adversary unlike any they had encountered before. The real challenge would be identifying and stopping the threat before it could achieve whatever objectives had motivated this elaborate surveillance operation. The revelation came at 3 a.m, when most of London was asleep and the palace corridors were patrolled only by night security guards. Sarah Mitchell sat in the makeshift command centre that had been established in a windowless room deep within Kensington Palace, surrounded by computer screens, surveillance equipment, and the growing mountain of evidence that painted an increasingly disturbing picture. The breakthrough had come from an unexpected source. Dr. Elena Vasquez, a cybersecurity specialist on loan from MI5, had been analyzing the tracking device's communication patterns when she discovered something that made her call Sarah immediately. Despite the late hour, hidden within the device's routine location transmissions were secondary data packets containing information that had nothing to do with Charlotte's whereabouts. "Look at this," Dr. Vasquez said, pointing to lines of code displayed on her computer screen. The device isn't just tracking location data. It's also recording audio snippets and transmitting them during specific time windows. Someone has been listening to Princess Charlotte's conversations. The implications hit Sarah like a physical blow. For weeks, unknown adversaries had not only been tracking Charlotte's movements but also monitoring her private conversations. Every interaction with her family, her friends, and her protection officers had potentially been compromised. The violation felt personal and profound, striking at the heart of what the protection team was supposed to prevent. Working through the night, Dr. Myra Vasquez and her team decoded the audio data that had been transmitted over the past 3 weeks. What they discovered was a treasure trove of intimate family moments, private conversations, and sensitive information about royal family schedules and security arrangements. The recordings revealed details about upcoming events, travel plans, and even private discussions between Prince William and Princess Catherine about their children's well-being. Sarah realized that whoever was behind this operation now possessed enough information to predict the family's movements, understand their relationships, and potentially exploit their vulnerabilities. The surveillance had captured not just facts and schedules, but the emotional dynamics and personal concerns that could be weaponized against them. Commander Hayes arrived at the palace before dawn, his face grim as he reviewed the latest findings. The investigation had uncovered evidence of a surveillance operation that was far more sophisticated and invasive than anyone had initially imagined. The tracking device was not just a tool for monitoring location. It was a comprehensive intelligence-gathering instrument. "We need to consider the possibility that this is preparation for something larger," Commander Hayes said during the emergency briefing that convened as the sun rose over London. The level of detailed information they've gathered suggests they're planning something that requires extensive knowledge of the family's routines and relationships. The investigation team had grown to include representatives from multiple intelligence agencies, all working together to understand the scope and objectives of the surveillance operation. The presence of MI5, MI6, and Scotland Yard specialists in the palace's basement conference room was unprecedented, reflecting the seriousness with which the government viewed the threat. Sarah had spent the early morning hours reviewing security footage from the palace, looking for any signs that other family members might be under similar surveillance. The comprehensive sweep of royal belongings had not revealed additional tracking devices, but the sophisticated nature of the equipment they had found suggested that other surveillance methods might be in use. Her investigation into Thomas Whitmore had also progressed significantly. Financial records obtained through intelligence channels revealed that Whitmore had received several large payments from offshore accounts over the past 6 months. The timing of these payments corresponded exactly with his employment at the palace and the beginning of the surveillance operation. More disturbing was the discovery that Whitmore's identity itself might be fabricated. The deeper the investigators dug into his background, the more inconsistencies they found. Employment records that didn't quite match, educational credentials that couldn't be fully verified, and personal references who seemed to have unusually sketchy histories themselves. The realization that they had been harboring a potential intelligence operative within the palace walls sent shockwaves through the security establishment. If Whitmore was indeed working for a foreign intelligence service, he had been perfectly positioned to gather information, plant surveillance devices, and potentially carry out more direct threats against the royal family. Sarah coordinated with the surveillance team that had been discreetly monitoring Whitmore's activities since he had emerged as a suspect. They had discovered that he maintained contact with several individuals who had no apparent connection to his work at the palace. Phone records showed encrypted communications with numbers traced to various European countries, suggesting an active intelligence network. The decision was made to continue monitoring Whitmore while gathering enough evidence to ensure a successful prosecution. Arresting him immediately might alert his handlers that their operation had been compromised, potentially putting the royal family at greater risk if backup plans were activated. The careful balance between protection and investigation required constant attention and coordination. Meanwhile, Charlotte continued her daily routine, blissfully unaware of the drama unfolding around her. Sarah found it increasingly difficult to maintain her composure during their interactions, knowing that every word the child spoke might be transmitted to unknown adversaries. The trust and innocence in Charlotte's eyes served as a constant reminder of what was at stake. The psychological pressure on the protection team was immense. They were responsible not only for keeping the royal family safe, but also for maintaining the appearance of normalcy while conducting an active counterintelligence operation. Every smile had to be genuine, every routine had to appear unchanged, and every interaction had to seem natural despite the knowledge that they were potentially being watched and listened to. Dr. Jennings Vasquez made another significant discovery while analyzing the tracking device's technical specifications. The device contained components that were only manufactured by a single company in Switzerland, a firm with known connections to various intelligence services around the world. This provided investigators with their first concrete lead to the source of the surveillance equipment. The Swiss connection opened up new avenues of investigation involving international intelligence cooperation. Swiss authorities were contacted through diplomatic channels, and requests were made for information about recent purchases of the specialized components found in the tracking device. This type of international cooperation was delicate and time-consuming, but it offered the possibility of tracing the surveillance operation back to its source. Sarah also discovered that the palace's electronic systems had been subjected to subtle intrusions that had previously gone undetected. Whitmore's access to the building's technical infrastructure had apparently allowed him to install additional surveillance capabilities beyond the tracking device on Charlotte's bag. Security cameras had been modified to provide external access, communication systems had been compromised to allow eavesdropping, and even the palace's internet connections had been infiltrated. The scope of the surveillance operation was staggering. For months, the royal family had been living in what amounted to a glass house, with their every movement, conversation, and private moment potentially being monitored by hostile forces. The violation of privacy was complete and systematic, representing one of the most serious security breaches in modern royal history. As the investigation entered its second week, patterns began to emerge from the data that had been collected. The surveillance seemed particularly focused on Charlotte's interactions with her parents and her responses to various situations. Psychological profiles were apparently being developed, possibly to understand how the child might react under stress or during a crisis. This focus on Charlotte's psychological state raised alarming questions about the ultimate objectives of the surveillance operation. If the goal was simply to gather intelligence about royal family activities, the level of detail being collected seemed excessive. The emphasis on the child's emotional responses and family dynamics suggested that more sinister plans might be under consideration. Sarah found herself working around the clock, driven by the knowledge that time might be running out to prevent whatever the surveillance operation was designed to facilitate. The tracking device had been discovered, but the larger threat remained active and potentially more dangerous now that its cover might be blown. The investigation had revealed the existence of a sophisticated intelligence operation targeting the royal family. But the most important questions remained unanswered. Who was behind the surveillance? What were their ultimate objectives? And most critically, what were they planning to do with all the information they had gathered about Princess Charlotte and her family? The confrontation that would change everything began with a single photograph taken by a surveillance camera outside a small cafe in South London. Thomas Whitmore, the palace maintenance worker who had been under discreet observation for over a week, was captured meeting with a woman who intelligence databases quickly identified as Katerina Volkov, a known operative of a foreign intelligence service. Sarah Mitchell stared at the photograph on her computer screen, feeling a mixture of vindication and dread. The image provided the confirmation they needed that Whitmore was indeed working for a hostile intelligence operation, but it also meant that the threat to Princess Charlotte and her family was far more serious than even their worst-case scenarios had suggested. The meeting had taken place in broad daylight, suggesting either extraordinary confidence or dangerous desperation on the part of the operatives. Intelligence analysts studying the body language and positioning in the photographs concluded that this was likely an emergency meeting, possibly triggered by concerns that their surveillance operation had been detected. Commander Hayes immediately authorized around-the-clock surveillance of both Whitmore and Volkov, while intelligence agencies worked to identify other members of their network. The operation had clearly grown beyond a simple security investigation into a full-scale counterintelligence effort with international implications.
Dr. Akardiaki was famously inhabited with the question that was responsible.
Vasquez had continued her analysis of the data transmissions from Charlotte's tracking device and made a discovery that sent chills through the entire investigation team. The most recent transmissions included detailed floor plans of Thomas's Battersea School, complete with security protocols, staff schedules, and evacuation procedures. Someone was planning an operation that required intimate knowledge of the school's layout and security arrangements. The implications were terrifying. All the surveillance, all the careful intelligence gathering about Charlotte's routines and psychological profile appeared to be preparation for an operation at her school. The tracking device had not only monitored her movements, but had also been used to map the location where she spent most of her days, away from the palace's comprehensive security systems. Sarah felt a cold knot form in her stomach as she realized what they might be facing. A kidnapping attempt at the school would be audacious beyond anything previously attempted against the royal family. The detailed intelligence that had been gathered would allow the operatives to predict Charlotte's exact location at any given time during the school day, plan their approach routes, and anticipate security responses. The investigation team worked frantically to piece together the timeline and scope of the planned operation. Communications intercepts revealed that multiple teams were being positioned around London, with specialized equipment and expertise that suggested a military-style operation rather than a criminal enterprise. The resources being deployed were substantial, indicating that this was a state-sponsored operation rather than the work of individual criminals. Intelligence agencies across Europe were contacted to share information about known associates of Katerina Volkov and similar operations that might be connected to the surveillance of Princess Charlotte. The response was sobering. Volkov was linked to several high-profile kidnapping attempts and assassination plots across the continent, though she had never been successfully prosecuted due to the sophisticated support networks that protected her. Sarah found herself assigned to coordinate the protection response while continuing to maintain the appearance of normal routine around Charlotte. The challenge was enormous. They needed to protect the princess from a sophisticated threat while gathering enough intelligence to dismantle the entire operation. Any visible change in security arrangements might trigger the attack they were trying to prevent. The decision was made to allow Charlotte to continue attending school while implementing invisible security enhancements. Additional protection officers were positioned throughout the area around Thomas's Battersea, disguised as parents, maintenance workers, and other ordinary members of the public. Technical surveillance equipment was installed to monitor all approaches to the school, and rapid response teams were positioned at strategic locations throughout London. Meanwhile, the investigation into the surveillance network continued to reveal disturbing details about how extensively the royal family's lives had been penetrated. The analysis of intercepted communications suggested that the operation had been in planning for over a year, with multiple phases of intelligence gathering and preparation. Charlotte had been selected as the target, not randomly, but because detailed psychological profiles had identified her as the family member whose disappearance would have the greatest emotional impact on Prince William and Princess Catherine. The coldly calculated nature of the threat was perhaps its most chilling aspect. This was not an operation driven by political ideology or personal grievance, but rather a carefully planned intelligence operation designed to maximize psychological pressure on the royal family and, by extension, the British government. The implications extended far beyond personal security into questions of national sovereignty and international relations. Dr. Vasquez's technical analysis revealed that the tracking device on Charlotte's bag was just one component of a much larger surveillance network that had been monitoring multiple aspects of royal family life. Electronic devices throughout Kensington Palace had been compromised, vehicles had been tracked, and even personal communication devices had been infiltrated. The scope of the surveillance was comprehensive and had been ongoing for months without detection. Sarah coordinated with intelligence analysts to develop profiles of the other operatives who might be involved in the planned operation. Financial intelligence revealed a complex network of shell companies and offshore accounts that had been used to fund the operation, with money trails leading back to sources that intelligence agencies were reluctant to discuss in detail, suggesting state-level sponsorship. The psychological pressure of maintaining normal routines while knowing that an attack was being planned was taking its toll on everyone involved in Charlotte's protection. Sarah found herself analyzing every person they encountered, every vehicle that passed near their route, and every deviation from normal routine for signs of the impending threat. Charlotte herself remained cheerful and oblivious to the drama surrounding her, though she occasionally asked Sarah why she seemed more serious than usual. These moments of innocent concern from the child she was protecting served as painful reminders of what was at stake and the responsibility that rested on Sarah's shoulders. The breakthrough that would ultimately expose the full scope of the operation came from an unexpected source. Maintenance records at Thomas's Battersea revealed that Whitmore had conducted unauthorized work at the school several months earlier, ostensibly fixing a problem with the building's electronic systems. Security footage from that time showed him accessing areas of the school that were not related to his stated work orders, including rooms adjacent to Charlotte's classroom and the building's main security control center. This discovery prompted an immediate technical sweep of the school, which revealed additional surveillance devices that had been installed throughout the building. The school had been comprehensively penetrated with cameras, listening devices, and even equipment capable of monitoring electronic communications. The operatives had created their own private surveillance network within the institution, where Charlotte spent most of her time away from palace security. The realization that Thomas's Battersea itself had been compromised forced a fundamental reassessment of Charlotte's safety. The school that had been considered a secure environment was actually the center of an elaborate intelligence operation. Every day that Charlotte attended classes, she was walking into a space that was completely controlled by hostile forces. Commander Hayes faced an impossible decision. Removing Charlotte from school would immediately alert the operatives that their surveillance had been detected, potentially triggering the attack they were trying to prevent. However, continuing to send her to a compromised location was an unacceptable risk. The solution they developed required unprecedented coordination between multiple agencies and would test every aspect of their training and preparation. As Sarah prepared for what she knew would be the most challenging phase of the operation, she reflected on how dramatically the situation had evolved since that morning when she first noticed the small bulge in Charlotte's school bag. What had begun as a routine security check had uncovered an international intelligence operation that threatened not only the safety of one 8-year-old princess, but also the security of the entire royal family and potentially the stability of the government itself. The next phase would determine whether months of careful planning by hostile operatives would succeed, or whether the dedication and skill of Charlotte's protection team would be enough to keep her safe while dismantling the threat that had been growing in the shadows around them. The morning that would end the surveillance operation and change royal security forever began with deceptive normalcy. Princess Charlotte bounced through her morning routine at Kensington Palace, completely unaware that today would be the day her protection team finally confronted the threat that had been lurking in the shadows for months. Sarah Mitchell had barely slept, spending the night reviewing the operational plan that had been developed through coordination between the Royal Protection Squad, MI5, and specialist units from the Metropolitan Police. The plan was complex, risky, and required perfect timing to succeed without putting Charlotte in danger. The intelligence gathered over the past 2 weeks had revealed that the planned operation against Princess Charlotte was scheduled for this morning, during the transition period, when she would normally walk from the school's main entrance to her classroom. The surveillance data had identified this as a vulnerable window when Charlotte would be moving through areas with limited security coverage, making it the ideal moment for a kidnapping attempt. Commander Hayes had made the difficult decision to use Charlotte as unknowing bait, allowing her to follow her normal routine while protection officers and intelligence operatives positioned themselves to intercept the attack. The alternative options, such as keeping Charlotte away from school or dramatically increasing visible security, would have alerted the operatives that their surveillance had been detected and likely resulted in them disappearing back into the shadows to plan another operation. The morning began exactly as it had for months. Charlotte gathered her belongings, including the backpack that still contained the tracking device that had started this entire investigation. Sarah had argued for removing the device, but intelligence analysts insisted that it needed to remain in place to maintain the illusion that the surveillance was still undetected. Every detail had to appear normal to avoid triggering contingency plans that might be even more dangerous. As they left Kensington Palace, Sarah was hyper-aware of the additional protection officers who were now part of their daily routine, though they remained invisible to casual observation. Specialists trained in close protection were positioned throughout the route to Thomas's Battersea, ready to respond instantly if anything went wrong with the carefully orchestrated plan. The drive to school proceeded normally, but Sarah's trained eye caught glimpses of the extensive security apparatus that had been deployed around them. Surveillance vehicles maintained discreet distances while monitoring the roads ahead for any signs of hostile activity. Technical specialists were tracking all electronic communications in the area, watching for the coded signals that intelligence analysts had identified as coordination methods used by the surveillance network. Charlotte chatted about her upcoming art project and her excitement about a school trip planned for the following week, conversations that Sarah knew were being transmitted in real time to the operatives who were preparing to intercept her. The violation of the child's innocence and privacy continued to fuel Sarah's determination to bring this operation to a successful conclusion. The first sign that something was wrong came as they approached the school. Dr. Vasquez, monitoring communications from the mobile command center that had been established nearby, detected an unusual pattern of electronic activity that suggested the hostile operatives were moving into position. The plan was being activated, exactly as intelligence analysts had predicted. Thomas Whitmore had called in sick that morning, ostensibly due to a family emergency, but surveillance teams confirmed that he was actually positioned near the school in a vehicle equipped with sophisticated communication equipment. From this location, he was apparently coordinating the operation while maintaining the ability to escape quickly if things went wrong. Katerina Volkov and at least 3 other operatives had been identified in the area around the school, positioned to create a coordinated attack that would overwhelm the school's limited security and extract Charlotte before effective resistance could be organized. Their equipment included items consistent with a professional kidnapping operation: restraints, sedatives, and transportation vehicles with modified license plates. As Charlotte's car pulled up to the school entrance, Sarah felt her heart rate accelerate despite her professional training. Everything now depended on the protection team's ability to allow the operation to begin while maintaining control of the situation. The margin for error was virtually non-existent, as any mistake could result in Charlotte being harmed or the operatives escaping to plan another attempt. Charlotte stepped out of the vehicle with her usual cheerful demeanor, waving goodbye to Sarah as she had done hundreds of times before. Today, however, Sarah would not be watching her disappear into the school building. Instead, she would be following closely behind, ready to intervene the moment the hostile operatives revealed themselves. The attack began exactly as intelligence analysts had predicted. As Charlotte approached the school's main entrance, 2 operatives dressed as maintenance workers moved to intercept her path, while a third positioned himself to block her retreat. The coordination was precise and professional, designed to complete the kidnapping within seconds before anyone could respond. What the operatives didn't know was that every move they made was being monitored and anticipated. As they closed in on Charlotte, protection officers who had been positioned throughout the area moved with practiced precision to surround them. The school's security cameras, which the operatives believed they controlled, had been restored to full functionality without their knowledge, providing real-time intelligence to the response team. Sarah stepped between Charlotte and the nearest operative, her hand moving to the concealed weapon that she hoped she wouldn't need to use. The man attempting to approach the princess suddenly found himself face to face with a determined protection officer who had been anticipating this moment for weeks. Armed police. Stop where you are. The commands came from multiple directions as specialist officers emerged from concealment throughout the school grounds. The operatives, who had expected to encounter only minimal resistance from school security, suddenly found themselves outnumbered and outgunned by a coordinated response team. The confrontation lasted only seconds, but for Sarah it felt like an eternity. Charlotte, confused and frightened by the sudden appearance of armed officers around her, looked to Sarah for reassurance. In that moment, Sarah realized that her primary responsibility remained unchanged: protecting the child who had been placed in her care. Katerina Volkov attempted to escape through a route that had been carefully planned during months of surveillance, only to find it blocked by officers who had been studying her preparations as intensively as she had been studying theirs. The comprehensive intelligence gathered about the operation allowed the protection team to anticipate every contingency and counter every escape plan. Thomas Whitmore, monitoring the operation from his command vehicle, realized that something had gone catastrophically wrong when his team failed to check in according to their predetermined schedule. His attempt to flee was intercepted by surveillance teams who had been tracking his movements since the investigation began. The technical equipment in his vehicle provided investigators with a treasure trove of evidence about the scope and objectives of the surveillance operation. Within minutes, the school grounds that had been the site of months of careful planning by hostile operatives were secured by British intelligence and protection services. The threat to Princess Charlotte had been neutralized, and the network that had been spying on the royal family for months was finally in custody. Charlotte, still not fully understanding what had happened, was quickly escorted to safety while investigators began the process of dismantling the surveillance network that had penetrated both the palace and her school. The tracking device that had started the entire investigation was finally removed from her backpack, ending the violation of her privacy that had continued for weeks. The investigation that followed revealed the full scope of what had been attempted. Intelligence analysis showed that the kidnapping of Princess Charlotte had been planned as part of a larger operation designed to destabilize the British government and create international incident. The detailed psychological profiles that had been developed were intended to guide negotiations that would have placed impossible demands on both the royal family and the government. Sarah felt a profound sense of relief as she watched Charlotte return to a normal routine in the days that followed. The child's resilience and natural optimism had helped her recover quickly from the frightening events, though the protection protocols around her would be permanently enhanced based on lessons learned from the investigation. The successful conclusion of the operation represented a victory not just for the protection team, but for the principles of security and privacy that they had sworn to defend. The hostile intelligence network had been dismantled, its operatives were in custody, and the royal family could once again feel secure in their daily lives. For Sarah, the investigation had been a career-defining experience that demonstrated both the evolving nature of threats against the royal family and the importance of attention to detail in protection work. The small tracking device that she had discovered through routine vigilance had uncovered an international conspiracy that could have had devastating consequences if it had been allowed to proceed. As Charlotte settled back into her school routine, laughing with friends and focusing on her studies, Sarah reflected on the responsibility that came with protecting not just a member of the royal family, but a child whose innocence and trust had been preserved despite the sophisticated threats that had surrounded her. The investigation was over, but the commitment to keeping her safe would continue for years to come.